Thanks for coming. My name is Jeff Berghoff. I'm the chairman of the Scottsdale Gateway Alliance, and today we're going to, thank you for coming. Today we're going to have Fritz walk us through some things about the McDowell corridor and some exciting things going on that the city is going to be doing. My background, I'm an Arizona native. I grew up here, went to ASU, studied landscape architecture, and why I'm involved in the SGA and the McDowell corridor is that I have a building just a few, actually probably a 9-iron from here. I bought the Scottsdale, the old Nissan building where I run my landscape business, and I employ about 275, 300 people, and that's our main operations center. I'm very passionate about what we're doing with the SGA and the McDowell corridor. As you know, McDowell, which once was one of the most heavily trafficked areas in the city, in a link through the East Valley and the West Valley, and McDowell goes all the way through, has kind of turned into southern Scottsdale light. And over the years, it really hasn't had any revitalization. Everything has kind of been to North Scottsdale, Kierland, Deer Park. And this area, with all the auto dealerships leaving, has turned into what I refer to as Van Buren. Which, if you're a native of Arizona, Van Buren doesn't have such a good connotation. And when I was a senior at ASU doing my thesis, I actually did my thesis on Van Buren and the linkage of downtown Tempe to Phoenix and kind of that historic quality. And if you look at McDowell, it has many of the same historic kind of interludes and how it grew up and how it grew with the city and how McDowell in southern Scottsdale really was kind of the beginning of North Scottsdale and what Scottsdale really became. It used to be one of the, it provided with all the auto dealerships the highest tax generating revenue for the city of Scottsdale. And Virginia is going to kind of tell you a little bit more about the history and her involvement. But thank you for coming, and we're excited to hear more of what Fritz going to outline today.
Thank you, Mr. Berghoff. So if you remember McDowell Road back in 1975, 1980, Los Arcos was going very strongly, and we had 32 franchise dealerships in 1 square mile, quote unquote. This area generated 67% of the city's general tax revenue, which was huge. It generated anywhere from $7 to $9 million a year. And in 2008, it seemed like in 1 year that those 32 franchises basically disappeared and collapsed, and now we have 7. That is a huge impact to the city's general fund, but more importantly, it was a huge impact to McDowell Road. And Suzanne's going to talk about both of us on the campaign trail together. It was 2 years ago. We committed to McDowell Road and trying to make something happen. And even though my family was vested down here on the corner of Scottsdale Road and McDowell for over 40 years, we've recently sold, about 6 months ago, we sold that property. That does not diminish my commitment to this area, nor Suzanne's, nor anyone else that's involved with McDowell Road, because we really believe that this corridor and this part of Scottsdale has great potential, and that we're on the right road, and you're going to hear some of that today. So thank you.
Thank you. So fast forward to today, and as Virginia said, when we were on the campaign trail a couple years ago, we were hearing from citizens as well as the newspaper would constantly ask us questions about what do we think about this, what do we think about that, what do we think about McDowell Road, what should be done on McDowell Road, and my answer always was, the city can only do so much. The city can only develop so much and do so much with infrastructure. Then it's going to take the private sector to be involved. The private sector has to have a commitment to making a difference on McDowell Road. So I'm very, very happy that the Scottsdale Gateway Alliance has been formed in order to bring the private sector together. That's the business people, the business managers, the residents, the people in this area, to help the city to strengthen the McDowell Road, the southern Scottsdale corridor, the entire neighborhood area. That's what Scottsdale Gateway is all about. And so with that, I wanted to make sure that you understand that the city council is very committed, the city's very committed, and I'm learning through SGA that the neighborhoods and the business owners are very committed in making Scottsdale Road, Southern Scottsdale Road and McDowell Road much stronger than it has been over the last 20 years. With that, I'm going to introduce Fritz Behring, who's our city manager, who's going to get into more detail about what the city is doing in order to make some improvements, revitalization in the area. Fritz?
First of all, can everybody hear me? I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I don't expect to have a really flashy presentation, more of a discussion about what the city's role is going to be in this process. And I have this nifty handout that my staff put together for me yesterday, and it might kind of give you a visual map to look at while we're talking about McDowell Road. I was hired by the council last year. One of the things that was made clear to me right from the very start is that McDowell Corridor was one of the highest priorities for the city council. An interesting thing, I was familiar with McDowell Corridor because years ago I bought my car in Scottsdale on McDowell Corridor. And before I came to Scottsdale, I could never figure out, why doesn't McDowell Corridor look like the rest of Scottsdale? What's here that's different? What's happened? I obviously did not have the history of the motor mile and the great revenue generator in the business community that was down here years ago. But it's all come together for me over the last several months. And I think we have some great opportunities here, and I think the future is very bright, to be real honest. A little bit of a background here. The city has made the study and the work in the McDowell Corridor a priority. Several of my bosses have talked about this for years, and I really think that the situation, the timing is right. With the recession hitting, ASU's, obviously SkySong, the city's investment in this facility, it's now starting to pay off. Even some of my bosses were critical of SkySong in the past, and even those skeptics are coming around to seeing the real benefits that ASU SkySong has. As the recession is waning, the economy is coming back, we're starting to see more interest in the area, and I'm a firm believer that 5 years from now, if the city does the right things, and if the private sector does the right things, you won't recognize McDowell Corridor as it looks today. There's plenty of interest down here. There's lots of private investment in the area, and you're going to start to see this happening very quickly. A little bit of background. Over the last year, building permit activity in this part of the city is growing rapidly. There is activity down here. The private sector stepping up, taking care of their properties, making investments. We have private sector developers who come in and meet with my staff. I have a developer coming to meet with me in the next couple of weeks who's interested in a targeted piece down here on McDowell Corridor to take an existing infrastructure, a large property in the area, and really redeveloping it into something neat. But the private sector isn't going to do that stuff and spend a lot of money until the market is right. My role as city manager, and what I'm trying to get my staff to get their heads around, is that our role is to make it easy for them to do that, to not put up roadblocks to that, and to encourage that type of activity, and to take those developers and not just slap some paint on an existing building, but start to reuse existing facilities. And in cases where we need to, let's tear down those buildings and build new and better facilities in the McDowell Corridor. So the activity is starting, and that's not just talk. I'm not a politician. I've never been accused of being a politician. I'm not good looking enough to be a politician, but it is starting to happen, and I truly believe that you're going to see some positive activity. So what role does the city have to play in that? One role that the city has to play in is that in cases where there's public needs and public infrastructure needs, we need to commit money. The city has committed a great deal of money in the past to utility infrastructure needs here, and we're going to continue to improve those infrastructure needs. One thing that's an easy, visible thing is that on McDowell Corridor, the berms that exist down there as where you would typically see the wash park, we are in discussions already with the executor of the estate that owns that property, and it's our plan to buy that property, get rid of those berms, open that up into the park area, so you have that same visual feel when you're driving down McDowell that you have on other places in the city of Scottsdale. It's not only just a visual barrier, it's a real barrier to the whole feel for the area. And the executor, my staff has told me that the executor is willing to to look at a sale to the city. Obviously, they have a fiduciary responsibility. They're not going to give it to us for free. We're going to have to put some money into it. But the city council is supportive of that, is supportive of buying that and opening that up. In addition to that, the one thing that the city can do is we can continue our efforts at roadway improvements, right-of-way improvements, sidewalk improvements, and tying the infrastructure and the improvements that the city of Tempe is doing to the south of us, tying those all together so there's a natural flow, that the area is attractive in appearance, and making sure that those few things that the city has control over directly, that we're doing our part to contribute, so the private sector, when they put money into their projects, knows that they have a partner in that. The city is not going to come in. I have a pretty conservative boss, as a pretty conservative council. They're not going to come in and spend lots and lots of money buying up property. They're not going to condemn private property. They're not going to put a lot of infrastructure into private sector areas. They're going to do what they can as a public sector partner to help encourage the private sector to do those things. One of the problems that we have in Scottsdale across the board is transportation issues, the lack of effective transportation for people, and I want to talk about some transportation improvements that we're looking at down here in McDowell. But before that, I want to introduce Margaret Dunn. Margaret, would you like to stand up and just give them a brief update about what you're talking about, what you're looking at doing for transportation improvements for McDowell?
Absolutely. Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity just to say a few words about transportation. It's been my passion for quite some time. Just very quickly, I'm also on the SGA board, and I have a quirky little property that I bought about 10 years ago right behind the Arby's that we converted a car wash and made it into our offices. We grew out of that space, and so now my tenant is Goodwill, and they operate their commercial landscaping and their janitorial services out of there. So I've long been passionate about McDowell Road. About, I would say, a year ago, Don Kubian with SkySong had approached me about getting together some sort of transportation from SkySong. And so every first Fridays, we started this about 3 months ago. We operate a lunchtime shuttle. So it's a pilot program, all privately funded, to see what kind of interest the tenants, the business people here have to hop on a free trolley. We run from 11 to 2 and pick up folks right in the center there between the two buildings, and then run every half hour up to Old Town for a lunchtime. Lunchtime shuttle, people can, stop on the way up. I was riding one day and we had some folks get off at Smash Burger at Thomas, and then we turned around and came back and they had their Smash Burger in their hand and they came back to the SkySong campus. So anyway, so we're trying those kinds of projects, public-private partnerships. The P3 is always a good model to follow, and we have vehicles and we'll travel, so we're always willing to try out new things, and Don's in the back. If Don, you're kind of the creator of the SkySong shuttle, so I don't know if you have any words to say about that, or?
No, we're trying as hard as we can to market it to the residents, to the tenants here at SkySong, and it's been so far, I think, a great amenity. Once we have the ability to build some additional amenities on site, there might be a little bit less of a need for it, Margaret, I'm sorry to say. But at the same time, I think we can we're working on expanding it for things like Christmas shopping for the tenants here. Hopefully we can begin, as the apartments begin to fill up, we can add to the ridership of it from folks who live at the apartments. So I think as we build up, as we end up with more and more people here coming to SkySong, living, working here, we'll end up having a lot more of those community connections.
And I'll disagree with you just a little bit. More people need more connectivity.
Right.
So, thank you.
One of the things that people have seen, and even in the short time in the past year, you're starting to see a lot more activity at the SkySong facility. And since Don's in the room, I won't steal his thunder and take away from what they've done here. But SkySong 3 is under construction. SkySong 4, I hope I'm not saying anything that's top secret, is in the planning processes. And we've started some very initial discussion between the city and ASU Foundation about what that building's going to encompass, how big it's going to be. And the nice problem is they're looking for more space at that last building facility than they have in their existing footprints. And so that's going to be an interesting discussion and a debate for the city council to get into, but that's a good problem to have. We have interest in the McDowell corridor, and you're going to start to continue to see the roll-off of that. The big apartment project right behind where we're standing today, the Mark Taylor apartments, as those apartments come online and there's even more residents living down here in the McDowell corridor, you're going to see increased demand for retail activity, for restaurants, for services. And I'm a firm believer that once this thing starts and the ball starts rolling down the hill, our job as a city is to get out of the way, do what we can to make sure it works, not create roadblocks, not create problems, but do what we can to let the private sector revitalize McDowell corridor. And I'm not just saying this, because part of my success as city manager is to make my bosses happy. This is a huge priority of theirs. They've talked about it for years. One of my bosses laments about the fact that they've talked about McDowell for 10 years and nothing's happened. Well, I truly believe that things are going to happen because the timing's right. The recession's over. Had the recession not hit, McDowell corridor, I'm convinced, would have been revitalized already. This is a gem. It's a beautiful area, and it really makes sense that this area thrive. From my perspective, my bosses have made it clear to me that they expect the staff to be on board with this, to be in a yes mode. When somebody comes forward with a project, we have to find a way to make it work. And additionally, too, we have to change our way of thinking in the city of Scottsdale, where the city staff and some of the city leadership, too, in the past, has always thought that they had to control everything. We have to get past that way of thinking and start to think more globally that we have to be a partner with the private sector. I would much rather have the private sector lead the change here, and that's why it's interesting to talk to this group today, is that here we have private sector investors, we have private sector owners, we have residential owners, we have business owners, all who have a committed interest to see that this thing works. And I want to make clear that you have a good partner with the city of Scottsdale going forward on this. The summary sheet that I handed to you is a map which lays out the McDowell corridor study area. We're talking about more than just the business commercial corridor right through the center. We're talking about the neighborhoods around it because we have some interesting challenges here. McDowell corridor was laid out years ago. We have some challenges that we have to work around. We have some very narrow commercial strips. We have some commercial lots that are very narrow. And unfortunately in Scottsdale, we have a very vocal, passionate, engaged population. And if you're a resident of Scottsdale and something's going to change in the property next door to you or behind you or near you, you're probably more engaged than most residents. And it's going to be tough to redevelop commercial properties along this strip when there's houses so close behind them. You get a lot of impassioned people who will show up and take an interest in this. So it's not as easy as just taking a huge, deep commercial lot and redeveloping it, because we have a lot of interest in the residents who live right behind it. So we have to continue to build that understanding, that communication. We don't want the public to think that things are happening down here on McDowell corridor that they don't know about. And one of the things that we have to do as a city is do better outreach with the neighborhoods and the people who are active in those neighborhoods around this area. But this will not, the properties will not develop or redevelop as easily along McDowell corridor because of the depth of the lots. That's just a physical reality. So the fact that they can't just go in and tear down properties and rebuild new properties to standard footprints that you'll see in a lot of commercial areas means you're going to have to reuse buildings, reuse existing infrastructure, reuse existing facilities. And the city council has shown an interest in being open to the idea that some of our existing buildings that are in these areas will have to be reused, and we'll maybe have to look at some bending of the rules or some changing of the rules to allow people to reuse a building that might have been intended for a commercial use in the 60s or 70s to turn it into an office use or a commercial use today. And that in some cases, it does not make financial sense for a private investor to go in and upgrade a building to today's building standards, to do everything required, because the bottom line just doesn't work at that point. We're going to have to look at those cases case by case and hopefully find a mechanism and a way by which we can allow the private sector's investors to take advantage of the infrastructure that's in place, reuse it, retask it, and make it a profitable venture for everybody. But that is something that the city of Scottsdale does not do that well, to be quite honest. We're not into that thinking, and so that's a new process for the city of Scottsdale. That's a new process for my staff. But as you can see here, there's a great deal of activity. We're already in the McDowell corridor. We have interest by developers who are looking at other projects and other things moving forward. And our role is going to be finding a way to bring both the private sector's interest in putting money in McDowell and the city's interest in seeing this thing become a thriving area and part of the city in the future together to make a good partnership. So, rather than me rambling on through here, this is some good, useful information. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that you might have specifically about the McDowell effort. Yes, sir.
Okay. As a resident of 41 years, just a stone's throw away from McDowell, I have a question, and a lot of people that live around this area are concerned. Height. We have a council that just loves these developers to come in and give them height, density, whatever. I don't want to see somebody that's living along there to worry about a 7-story building looking down in their property. That's not what I would like to see happen. I would like to see a lot of construction going on using the old buildings. I love it because the height is right there with us where we have been for many years. I would also love to see, looking at that corner of 64th and McDowell, that beautiful, nice area, why that couldn't be made into a nice visitor center, going along with Margaret on transportation. It could be a nice hub for transportation, and we know whenever the word light rail comes in, we know what happens. I mean, the feathers go up right away. No. But there's no reason why you could have a real nice center there and run right down through Keller Parkway. You've got the zoo, you've got the gardens in there where they could stop along the way and go right on down to Washington. There's a beautiful station there for light rail. You could run a spur line right down there, and that would take care of that light rail problem, really. You got the perfect land right over there for a real nice visitor center. It's all right there.
Well, obviously, that property is one of the gems of McDowell. And, you know, my personal position on that is that I want to make sure that that property and that property owner utilizes that building to his best interest and can make the most money out of that property, and that the city benefits from it as well. I don't want to see a use on that property that's not beneficial to the city, and I don't want to see a use on that property that's not beneficial to South Scottsdale. I don't want to see a use on that property that doesn't take full advantage of what it has. It's a huge, beautiful piece of property. The problem is that right now, and not to get into a lot of specifics about the ownership of that, but the owner has no incentive to do anything because he's making money on the property right now. And the situation is that there is no incentive for him to move forward on redeveloping it. A welcome center, there's been talk with the chamber about a welcome center, a commuter bus service between the airport and the city of Scottsdale. Those are things that we have to continue to evaluate. That might be a good location for it, but that would be an underuse of that property, in my opinion, that you could do a lot more with that property. You could have a residential component, you could have a retail component, you know, you could have a commercial entity there, you could have an educational entity there. You know, you could have many options there that could be a real job creator for this area to take advantage of that property.
You got a residential one going to be going into where the old Peachtree Buick was.
That's right. But there's going to be continued demand for residential. You're not going to see this entire area become multifamily or apartments or condos overnight. But you're going to continue to see more and more of that demand in the future. But that is a great piece of property. One thing I will mention, and I'm certainly not a politician, so I'm certainly not dumb enough to talk about light rail because I know the city has issues on both sides of it. The one thing we do need to encourage here in Scottsdale is increased mass transit in the form of better bus routes, more frequent bus service, more frequent trolley service, We have to be able to get people out of their cars if they want to get out of their cars and go places in Scottsdale. And so there's a great deal of logic to what you said about increasing that connectivity between Scottsdale and Phoenix, Scottsdale and Tempe, with increased bus service as a first step. If we can increase bus service and get more people out, especially the younger people who don't like to drive as much as older people do, out of their cars and allow them to get around to their work, their jobs, their homes, that'll be a real plus for this community. And but I appreciate your comments. But you're exactly right. Your comment about people love to see activity, they love to see redevelopment. They just don't want to see a 7-story redevelopment behind their house, blocking the views of what they've become accustomed to for decades in South Scottsdale. And I think the council's keenly aware of that. In the past, I know the council gets criticized that they're too easy to give up the height and the density. The reason that height and density is requested by the private sector is that in order to make these deals sometimes cash flow and to make them work, they have to have the increased density. So we have to find a way to do it and keep people in a situation where you're not ruining the quality of life for the existing residents to benefit a new developer. So,
But you know, on the height and density situation, again, Scottsdale doesn't really benefit that much. We gain taxes on the first level, if I'm not mistaken. Anything above that, we do not. Yet we have to do the infrastructure, the water, the sewer, and all that for that property. That's an extra expense coming in to our pocket that the developer doesn't have to do.
well, the one thing after being in public service for 25 years in public management, I can tell you that residential property in and of itself, for the most part, never cash flows for a city. The thing that really cash flows for a city, if you want to look at revenue versus expenditures, you want commercial, you want industrial properties. Obviously, Scottsdale doesn't have a lot of industrial property, and the people of Scottsdale don't want industrial property. So the next best thing is commercial activity. The best footprint I can have in the city, from a revenue point of view for the city, is more car lots. If I had 10 more car dealerships, I wouldn't have any financial problem. But I don't have 10 more car dealerships. Those are the golden gooses for city managers like me. If you can have car lots, because they generate a lot of tax revenue to a city, and they don't have a lot of impact. They don't have a lot of height. So these are all very good points that you're raising, sir. Any other questions?
Mr. City Manager, you mentioned sort of a rural activity. I'm curious, like an example of that? Kind of a developmental flow?
Well, the city of Tempe is doing right-of-way improvements up to their corporate limits. And it would look pretty bad, in my opinion, just as very simple terms, to have, if somebody's driving from North Tempe into the city of Scottsdale, to have beautiful tree-lined boulevard, and then all of a sudden, the landscaping stops, the right-of-way improvement stop, the bike path stop. We have to make that connectivity to what they're doing down there. And it's a simple thing to do. We're just going to have to redirect transportation money that we're using in other areas to make sure that that flows properly, and that flow from the city of Tempe into South Scottsdale is a seamless one. The last thing the city of Scottsdale wants to do is be outdone by Tempe in its appearance. And that means we're going to have to redirect money to this area, and we will redirect money to this area in the next year and two.
I'd like to segue on the flow from Tempe and from ASU. Has anybody talked about extending the orbits that go, within Tempe to Skyzone, so that we could access, like me, I could access light rail via a shuttle? Since nothing's going to happen with light rail in Scottsdale, I would like to get to light rail. Right now, I go to a park ride, but I would love to just walk to a shuttle and catch the light rail.
And those are exactly the things we're talking about, and I'm going to let Margaret talk about that, but those are exactly the things we're talking about with increased transportation funds to increase bus frequency so people can have that option to get to the light rail station. Margaret, did you want to?
Just real quickly, and I think one of the things that we can do is to communicate better how the Scottsdale trolley connects with other, like the Orbit. So we have both the Miller Road and we have the Scottsdale Neighborhood Connector that connect with the Orbit. So it'll take a transfer.
Yeah.
And so that, it's not a direct.
I know, and
So,
that's the problem.
yeah.
Because I work clear downtown. So that's, if I'm gonna add 30 to 45 minutes because of having to make transfers, then that's a little bit beyond even my pedestrian lifestyle commitment to public
Sure.
transportation.
Well, we're getting there, so.
But that's exactly the point. You have to make it user-friendly. It has to work for people in order for them to use it. And unfortunately, it takes a lot of money to do that. The legislature has just approved additional transportation funds through their bill process, through the budget process, that hopefully will mean about $600,000 to $700,000 more for the city of Scottsdale next year that we have to use for transportation. And our plan initially, unless I'm directed otherwise by the council, is to pump that money into increased bus service and increased connectivity for transit, because I think that's what people demand. In order for this thing to work, we have to have a better bus frequency, we have to have better bus service in and out of the city of Scottsdale, into Phoenix, into Tempe, but it all takes money, so.
Actually, this question is for you. The Miller Avenue, or the Miller Road, how well does Tempe and Scottsdale work together with, it would seem to me that Miller Road, if it just continued straight on Miller, onto the freeway, to the Tempe downtown, light rail would be a good solution for her problem. But that requires somebody, the funding, Tempe's got to fund their part, you got to fund your part. And I think that's probably where the disconnect is coming from.
I believe you're correct, and fortunately, we have a great advocate. Suzanne Klapp was just appointed to the RPTA board, which talks about that. In their discussions at the table, they talk about how cities can better provide that connectivity, so you don't feel like you have run up against a barricade when you get to the border of Tempe, Scottsdale. That the service may be 10 minutes on this side and every hour on this side, or doesn't exist. And so I think that those discussions are being actively spoken about now, and it is about money, and it is about, you know, the borders and how we open up that dialogue.
And I don't want you to think that the people who have been running Scottsdale for years have been concerned about this. They just haven't had the money to deal with it. When the state legislature, to balance their budgets over the last couple of years, grabbed all that money back and took it from the cities, that really limited our opportunities. But even what we're talking about, the additional $600,000 to $700,000 that we're going to get as a city, we're only going to be able to increase frequency on bus services right now from about 3 times an hour to 4 times an hour. And what that means is that we can now hopefully get a bus every 15 minutes on our east-west routes in and out of Phoenix. But that costs over $500,000 just to do that. It's a very incredibly expensive thing to subsidize mass transit. But it is a part, it's cheaper than building roads. It's cheaper than building more roads. And but these things do take time, they do take money, and the city has not had access to those funds for the last several years. So it's not just something that they didn't want to do, so.
Fritz, my couple of comments is as an active investor, I guess, in the area, you're a welcome breath of fresh air in terms of kind of calling it the way it is, and thank you for being here. Virginia and Suzanne for taking an active lead in it, and the SGA, Kyle Moyer, for putting it that there's 50 people talking about it here, not that it hasn't been talked about in the past. From private sector, if I guess I would speak, at least for myself in the private sector, if you said to me, well, what's the single most thing that city can do, in addition to what you said, I would say to empower your economic vitality department, in using tools that they can use to really make, as much as many residents would think, you know what, we're just going to magically convert some of these old buildings and it's going to turn into what we'd all like it to turn into. That really doesn't happen. It's wishful thinking, and the reason it's gotten to where it has is because someone looks at it and it's not worth investing the money or buying the property. And without some tools, which Danielle, you've also been a welcome addition, very versed in things that other cities are doing that would really, if her department and she specifically is enabled, some of the things that, when we do have a conservative council that answers to residents, but if really there's going to be change without, even though we can talk about it and say we're going to dress up the streets and match Tempe and whatever, without real change, you've got to empower some people to make some decisions that somebody's going to want to come down here and risk spending some money, and I applaud the effort and glad to be invested in an area with a captive group of people that want it different. So.
Well, I think you're exactly right. It's going to take a different way of thinking on the part of the city of Scottsdale and the city. There are times and opportunities where they're going to have to look at things that they may not feel comfortable with today. But what I want to make clear is we're only going to do right now what limits. I don't want you to come in here and say the city can wave a magic wand and take care of all these problems. We can't. We have limited amount of resources. We're going to do what we can that's appropriate. But more importantly, if the city leaders and the city council don't hear from the private sector, people like you and people who are in this room, they're never going to be open to those types of ideas. They're not going to listen to their staff members as much as they're going to listen to a private property owner or a resident of an area who wants to see things improve and change. So it's incumbent upon the people who live here and the people who own property here to get involved, just like you guys are doing today. That makes it, and the fact that I have several of my bosses in the room should tell you something, that these people take it seriously. And that, you know, elected officials who are engaged, who want to know what's going on, who want to know it's not just election year stuff, it's not just campaigns. We have candidates for office in here too. That's good. You want people to know what these issues are so they have a better understanding of them.
Because you talked about incentives to the folks at 64th Street.
You've had your full share of it. I'm just kidding. I'm not looking for more, are you?
Very happy with our partnership with Scottsdale. But it seems as though what the city could do would be to codify what incentives are available to developers. I mean, these properties that are available along the streets here, Scottsdale Road and McDowell Road, are expensive to buy. They take a long time to get rezoned or redeveloped. They're small. They have a lot of things. I've been in the development business for 25 years. They have a lot of hair on them, to use an old real estate term. But would it be possible for the city and the council, your bosses, to work through and say, these are the kind of incentives we're going to give, to sort of put together a package and let developers know, work with the community to enable the council to develop incentives so that people can come in and say, now I know what I can do, I know what my risks are. You know, redevelopment being an especially capital intensive business to be in, you don't want to risk your capital unless you know that you're going to be able to have some kind of reward. So is there any work going on in that area?
There's work going on similar to that, but I think that's going to take a little time for the council to get to that level of thinking. The first step is we're putting together kind of a checklist, especially on reuse of existing infrastructure. I think it's handy for a developer to be able to be given a document that they can walk out of the door with that says, if you want to reuse an existing commercial infrastructure building, these are the things we're going to allow you to do up front. We're not going to pull the rug out from underneath you 9 months into the process or a year into the process. These are the things you can do with existing. That's the first step. We have to get to that, and staff is working on that today. So an investor can come in and look at a one-story building, which a lot of my residents like, those one-story height buildings, reuse it, retask it for something else, and they know what their costs are going to be up front. That next level of that type of codifying what types of incentives, Scottsdale does not have a lot of incentives that we offer, unfortunately. And the limited things we can do, I think we can structure it in a way that people will know what they are. But I routinely meet with the economic development folks, and we meet with business prospects, and we meet with companies that are looking to locate in the valley, and they come to they look at Scottsdale, Tempe, wherever else. We know what those cities will do, and we know that those cities will sometimes write checks and put a lot of money on the table, and the city of Scottsdale just doesn't do that. And so the developers know that as well. And we have to do whatever we can do, either change the thinking of the elected officials, the governing body, to allow for those types of things, or at least make clear to investors in what they can bank on if they choose to put their money in investment in Scottsdale. But yeah, the worst thing you can do is say, oh yeah, we're going to tell you everything's going to be golden, and then it goes to the city council, and the city council says, hey, time out, this ain't going to fly. We didn't know about this. We didn't agree to this. And I think that's part of the thing, is just better communication. I heard that earlier this morning. I don't think there was a lot of communication, to be honest, between the staff in the city and the city leadership in the past. And so people were kind of surprised by stuff, or people were making promises at the staff level that couldn't be delivered by the city council. All of that is detrimental to good growth and good government. And so we have to have an honest, candid conversation. I meet with companies that want to come to the city of Scottsdale, and they'll sit down and they'll tell me, well, you know, the city of Glendale will give me this. And I say, well, if that's important to you, you better go to Glendale. If that's all that's important to you, some cash up front, you better go to Glendale. But if you're looking for a quality community, long-term, lower cost services than other cities, you want to look at Scottsdale.
But it doesn't have to be cash up front.
Oh, I realize that. I realize that.
A number of things.
I realize that.
Waivers for parking.
There's lots of things that we can look at that are not cash up front. Keep in mind, very similar to, I worked a lot of my career, it was in the state of Florida. Florida and Arizona, they didn't have to think about this kind of stuff, because as growth came to these two states and the construction boom hit, for decades, nobody had to worry about this stuff because it just happened. You know, the economy has changed, the dynamics have changed, and governments that were not suited to look at these types of issues never did look at these issues. We have to start looking at these issues. I grew up in South Dakota. Trust me, South Dakota was in the economic development game 25 years ago, farther ahead than Arizona is today, out of necessity. We had to be creative. We had to find ways to bring investment into South Dakota. 25 years ago, Citibank moved their corporate headquarters, credit card headquarters, to South Dakota, because we had creative legislator, we had a creative governor who realized they had to do something different. Arizona applauds itself for their great sweeping economic development changes. They still haven't got to where states like Iowa and Minnesota and Nebraska are from the 80s, because they've never had to deal with this stuff. So it's a slow process, but we appreciate this type of conversation because it has to happen. Any other comments?
I got one
Wes,
last
you've had
thing.
your share too, sir. I'm done. No, just kidding. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Hey, I can't help it.
That's okay. I like it.
You know, right from the top, and I am glad to see Virginia and Ms. Klapp sitting over here, but we need a council that works together. You look at the vote that's going on that council. There's no harmony. It seems to me it's oil and water. It's just not mixing. If it has to be, the citizens are going to have to get together, put a council in there that works together. That's what's going to make this project work. A council that can get along and work together. But it seems to me that there's too many on that council right now that have their own personal agenda going, and they're not working for the citizens. And I'm sorry to say it, but as an outsider looking in, when it comes time to the ballot, you better believe that I'm going to sit and look at some new people, because we're not working together, and I don't like what's become to our city. I've been here for 41 years, and it's not the same one that when I moved here 41 years ago. This was a real city to be proud of. I'm not proud right now. I'm sorry, but that's the way it is. And if we have to, we need to get a council, a mayor in there that's going to work together for the citizens and get this project done. And not only this one, but throughout the whole city. We need to work with the school districts and help the Scottsdale School District out. We need help. We can't do it when we're fighting each other. It just doesn't work. Thank you.
Well, as a city manager, I agree with you. We need to have a council that works together. And even when people disagree on specific issues, that doesn't mean that they can't come to compromise and find solutions that work for everybody. Unfortunately, I think a lot of elected officials at the local level look at Washington, D.C. and say, well, that's how elected officials ask. act, and that's how we have to ask, and that's unfortunate. You know, I think the city of Scottsdale, I think your comments are good, because when I applied for this job 20 years ago in the realm of a city manager, from a city manager's point of view, Scottsdale was one of the premier communities in the nation. Scottsdale was known as an innovative government. It was known as a creative place. It was known as a very effective city. And as its city management, from a city manager's point of view only, this was one of the premier jobs in the U.S. And when I applied for this job, people said, well, Fritz, why would you be interested to go to Scottsdale? It's not what it used to be. It's not the city it used to be. My goal as city manager is to get it back to where, as a city organization, we used to be 15 and 20 years ago. We've had a lot of turnover, had a lot of turmoil, and we've had a lot of wasted effort as a city staff. My job is I can only do what I can with the staff, but to get the staff working together in one direction. But I agree with you, that's right. We wasted a lot of time and effort on things that are not productive.
Just to bring a real quick point, last night I received a robo phone call from somebody that criticized Bob Littlefield on some remark that he quote unquote made at a council meeting, and is demanding that Mr. Bob Littlefield makes an apology. I sat there at that meeting. I don't get it. I just don't. Why? And who is putting out this kind of money to slander this guy? You know, and that's all it is. It's slander. It's stupid. Instead of working together to try and get things done, we got people out there fighting so that it's not getting done, and that's just ridiculous.
Well,
I tried to call. It says that you can on the button. You push the button. It said 2 if you would like to respond and talk to the people. I did. You know what I got? A busy signal, and then a line. Oh, we're not taking calls at this time. Yeah, I guess not.
You know, Jim, as a member of the council, I believe that diversity on the council is a good thing for our community.
Yeah.
That different opinions are good.
I agree.
Even though we don't have a 7-0 vote all the time, which I don't think you want as a citizen,
No.
we do work together and we do come to consensus often. But if you look at it, typically it's a 5-2 vote. A majority 5-2 is, I believe, a strong commitment to this community as a unified voice. I don't think you want a 7-0 vote.
I don't, Virginia. I do not want a 7-0 vote, but I don't want to see a constant 5-2. I do. That to me is not working together.
Well, Jim, and I don't think you see a constant 5-2. I think
No.
you see some of those split votes on contentious issues, and it's primarily around height, and it's around apartments, and that's where you see the split. But otherwise, I think we've got a good council, and I think it reflects the diversity of our community.
No. I hate to disagree with you.
Okay,
But
thank you.
there's a lot of people that don't
Respectfully.
agree with you on that we have a very good council.
Yeah, switch off. Off the politics side, going more back to the development side. What besides apartments and car dealerships, I mean, I know you kind of talked about it a little more, but what else is coming? I mean, you got Papago Plaza, I mean, these places that a lot of people, I mean, where we work at, they always talk about these plazas, like, what are they doing, what's gonna happen? I know there's talk about and rumors about what's going to happen, but what actually is, besides apartments and car dealerships, is coming to McDowell? Is there anything at all, like as far as?
There is. The project that I talked about is taking an existing commercial property and modifying it to commercial and residential combined use with professional offices. You're not going to see, you know, the only piece of property that offers a great deal of flexibility is a large tract of land down at 64th Street. And that's the only one that offers a great deal of flexibility for use. I can't tell you exactly what a lot of the specific small projects are. I can tell you about the residential projects, the big projects that are on the list. But no, I cannot tell you right off the top of my head what those projects are. But it's basically out, if you don't have a lot of footprint, you don't have a lot of land, you're quite limited as to what you can do with those properties.
to add on to his question, what kind of projects are you trying to attract to this area?
The city is not trying to choose what types of businesses come into properties. That's not our job. Our job is to make sure that whatever comes in can exist and coexist with the residential neighborhoods right behind it in a way that we don't have a lot of this conflict. What will happen, I'm a firm believer, as soon as these apartments continue to go up behind us and there's more people here, the demand for services will go up. You'll see increased traffic flow and need for service industry, restaurants, shopping. I know there's a lot of people say we'd like to have a Sprouts down in this part of the city or that type of stuff. We don't get in the business of picking and choosing which retailers come to the city. We don't do that. We just try to make sure that whatever comes in can cohabitate and coexist in the existing infrastructure that we have. The city, to the best of my knowledge, has never played that game of choosing which specific types of retail come in. We do have types of industry and employers that we attract to the city, that we try to attract. High wage jobs, professional jobs, we do attract those. Unfortunately, there's only about 1 or 2 pieces of land along McDowell that provide some flexibility for those types of development. They're both on each side, one near the interstate, one near the 101, and then the track right at the edge of the city across from the park. So if we have for instance, we met with a company that was looking to bring 600 jobs to the city of Scottsdale, to the Phoenix area. There are footprints here that we show them. This property could work. You have to go talk to the private property owner to buy it, but this property would work. We also have larger tracts down there near the 101. So we do earmark, and we do try to we'd love to see a job creator put up a large building down there near the 101 and employ several hundred people. We'd love to see that. But we don't go out and handpick. If they come to us looking for lots and stuff, we try to point them in the right direction. You wouldn't want to put something like that along a strip center down McDowell Road. You have to have a big enough footprint to put those on. So.
Maybe to the point of the back, though, it is the case that cities can describe their ambitions and what they'd like to see happen. And as was pointed out, things happen by chance. That's all that is allowed to happen. But you can cause things to be noticed in a different way. I mean, you've made an incredible investment in this facility, which is spinning off businesses. It's got a reputation locally, regionally, nationally. If you look at economic development plans for the state, you couldn't pick a better spot than what you've got going on here on Scottsdale Road and McDowell. So if you will, the marketing, branding, assembling of an idea that says the innovation coming out of this place, your partnership with ASU, kinds of businesses like the Yelps that you're attracting. If you were to describe McDowell and Scottsdale, but particularly McDowell with its buildings that are just waiting to be repurposed, which are ideal for those high-tech, clean industrial,
smart startup companies,
all those kinds of things. If you were to brand that and talk about, maybe to Don's point, what situations you put in place to make that easier to do, and you made tracks to Silicon Valley and a few other places to say, we actually have talked to our property owners and they're interested in this vision and we're helping to promote that. I think you could maybe get a more directed result. It's economic development, it's all those kinds of things. Is that possible?
Well, the city is right now finishing up a study. It's doing an update of their economic development plan. And so we're in that process right now. But more importantly, I think would be beneficial is that this group, as a private group, came to us and said to the city, this is what we think McDowell Corridor needs to be in the future. This is what we think you need to do. That's the thing that's missing. I truly believe if the private sector would come forward and say, and the neighborhoods would come forward and say, this is what we want for our corridor, you'd find a receptive bunch of people at City Hall. It doesn't have to be City Hall out to everybody else. I truly believe if you as a neighborhood, you as a community said, this is our vision for McDowell Road. This is our vision for what we want to see. These are the types of businesses we want to see, and we'll be supportive and cooperative and open to this type of stuff, but we won't be supportive of this. That's what I think this has been lacking, that dialogue, that communication. And if this is a logical, realistic group to pull that together and bring it to the city. But I think you're right, it helps, certainly would help us.
Yeah, I understand Scottsdale has adopted the 20th Street criteria within its general plan. I was just wondering, are you guys going to is there any discussion to implement that along the McDowell corridor?
I'm also somebody who admits they don't know what you're talking about, and I'm not sure what you're talking about on that, because, Kim, do you know what he's talking about?
Just something like a road diet to make bike lanes more pedestrian friendly.
Oh, yeah,
like that.
yeah. Kim?
Yes, we are doing that. In fact, down here at the bridge, one example, North McDowell Road is only, it's 3 miles long. We only have bike lane along a small portion of it. What we want to do is get bike lane along all of it. And so when you see the bridge get widened, one of the things we're doing there is adding the bike lane to it. So as we're going along, we're trying to get those facilities for it because we want to promote bicycle connectivity.
Any other comments or questions? I appreciate your time. Even if you don't have any comments or questions, please feel free to call me if you have an idea. If you have a good idea, a criticism, a gripe, you want to think, Fritz, you're crazy, you're not making any sense, feel free to call me. I got my business card with me today. And I did want to correct the gentleman who already left, who said that he didn't want to see 7-0 votes. As a city manager and you get hired, you want to see a 7-0 vote. So I'm happy that I got a 7-0 vote when I got hired, and my job is to try to keep 7 bosses happy, which isn't always easy when you have 5-2 votes off. And so I appreciate your time. If you have any ideas or suggestions, feel free to contact me.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for coming very much. Make sure when you leave today that we have your email information, or that you go on our social media, on our website, give us any comments, any feedback that you can. We sure appreciate hearing from everyone and for everyone coming out this morning. Thank you so much, and thank you very much, Fritz.
Try it.